Condensation from the breath of 180,000 people would rise to the top of the dome and then, cooling, fall like rain. To Ed McCann, the proportions of the dome would have rendered it not magnificent, but ridiculous.
This is an absolute parody of the Pantheon. I mean, he's taken a very adjusted form and balanced form, structurally rational diagram, and turned it into an overblown, top-heavy, inflated in every sense of the word solution. And I really don't like it at all. I think it's irrational in structural terms, it's hideous in moral terms, and it really doesn't do any justice to its inspiration, insofar as that was the Pantheon.
The project would never get beyond the land-clearing phase, and Speer's plans would ultimately be thwarted by war. But evidence lies all around Berlin of how far he would go to make Hitler's vision a reality. Outside the city was a center for the production of building materials, revealing the brutal nature of Hitler's quest for glory. It was part of the concentration camp, Sachsenhausen. Germania would be built on slave labor. Sachsenhausen was the prototype concentration camp. Built in the shape of a triangle, it could be controlled from just one machine gun emplacement. In 1938, it was extended to incorporate a new brickworks. A harbor was built to transport the camp's enormous output into the center of the city by canal.
Speer had signed a contract with the SS for all the bricks that Sachsenhausen could produce. Given that Sachsenhausen was near Berlin, it was meant to be a major provider of bricks for the rebuilding efforts.
For the camp's inmates, the brick production line, the Klinkerwerks, was the most dreaded assignment of all.
The brickworks were feared by the prisoners because it was a punishment unit, and the conditions here were the worst in all the working units of the camp. Single prisoners and groups of prisoners were sent here to the Klinkerwerk to be killed by the brutal conditions of working here. So you can say that the Klinkerwerk was something like a death camp for the concentration camp Sachsenhausen.
Camp survivor Adam Koenig recalls the conditions.
First of all, the winter was very hard. It was very cold. We didn't have appropriate clothing. There was little food too. It was a bad job, yes. And as a young boy at that time, I thought that must be like hell.
The slave workforce had to grow to meet demand. By 1944, 3,500 people were being worked to death there.
The Klinkerworks were the largest brickworks in whole Europe at that time, and tens of thousands of bricks should be produced here every day.
Hitler and Speer's ambition would depend on the sacrifice of countless lives. But then the outbreak of war brought a new challenge. Allied air raids threatened to destroy all Hitler and Speer had built so far. So Speer turned his attention to making the city bomb-proof. In 1941, Europe was a battle zone. Germany's Third Reich was a military state geared for conquest. Adolf Hitler and his architect Albert Speer were planning a new world capital to be called Germania. They'd built the Olympic Stadium and the Reich Chancellery, planned a great hall, another stadium and vast triumphal arch, a whole new city. But Allied bombs threatened their dreams. In response, Speer embarked upon a series of experiments to establish how to make the city indestructible. Today, it's still possible to find evidence of the tests he conducted. In a forest location an hour's drive from Berlin lies what was once a restricted test site. Surrounded by rubble, these 4 towers are the last traces of a covert project to create bomb-proof building materials.
The local population called this site Berlin Settlement. But this was a prohibited area and nobody had access to this site, nobody.
In 1941, Speer and his engineers started to identify which structures and materials were most resistant to bombardment.
They had this idea to design air raid shelters integrated in normal dwellings. And they want to know how they have to build it, if they are bomb-proofed or not.
Their experiments were simple. They built towers, then subjected them to varying types of assault.
The kind of ammunition which was used here includes all calibers of bombs and grenades, machine guns and cannons, and maybe they were checking rockets as well.
To reinforce walls, engineers braced concrete with steel rods. 500 yards from the towers stands a solitary piece of wall, nearly 7 feet thick and 20 feet high, still bearing the signs of impact from a rocket. The tests had two purposes: to determine how thick a wall had to be to withstand an Allied rocket attack, and to determine how fast a rocket would have to travel to penetrate such a wall. No written evidence remains of these tests. The detailed records of their results have been lost or destroyed. But it's clear that the Nazis had the technology to build structures that could survive a direct hit. They knew how to build effective bomb shelters. The only problem was the time it would take and the cost in materials and labor. While Hitler pushed ahead with his dream of creating the perfect city of Germania, the priority for his engineers became defense and survival. They were ordered to build over 1,000 bunkers and 6 anti-aircraft towers for Berlin. Ultimately, there were only enough spaces in the shelters for 10% of the population, and yet 200 million cubic meters of reinforced concrete was used. Today, beneath the streets of Berlin, are the remains of the vast complex of underground bunkers. Beneath the platform of this metro station is a perfectly preserved air raid shelter. Built to accommodate 1,400 people, at the height of the bombing, almost 5,000 crammed into these rooms.
As you can see, in every room here we have a sign, and the sign tells us how many people are allowed to be in the room. Here it is 20%. But during the air raids, more and more people try to get safe inside the bunkers, and so in here, in this room, there were sometimes more than 60, 70 people.
There was no ventilation system, no air shafts. People faced suffocation and the threat of gas leaks. Sometimes they would have to evacuate the bunker in the middle of an air raid. The electricity supply was often interrupted, plunging the shelters into pitch darkness. Engineers used a drastic and toxic solution: phosphorus paint.
During the air raids, the light fails often, and so you have to be prepared. You see, in a dark bunker, you don't see anything, and therefore this whole room and many rooms inside here were painted with phosphorized color. Here you can see how it works.
As the people of Berlin were forced to retreat below ground, so was their Führer.
All important leaders in this time in the world has had his own bunker. Stalin, Mr. Roosevelt, for example, I'm sure, and Mr. Churchill. And so it's absolute normally that Hitler has had his own bunker in Berlin too.
Hitler's personal bunker was sealed by the Soviet army when they captured it in 1945. But from blueprints and eyewitness testimony, we can recreate the place where he spent his last days. Rokas Misch is one of the last survivors of the Führer's bunker. When he entered it as Hitler's bodyguard, he was assured it was impregnable.
Der Bunker war wie tot.
The bunker was dead. Everyone whispered. I was afraid. I had a neighbor, and he told me that he was there when the bunker was built. He told me it had been built, so it could not be blown up. So afterwards, I was content.
Almost bomb-proof, the bunker's walls and ceilings were 13 feet thick.
It was not a bunker for living in. It was an air raid shelter to protect people during a bombing raid. There was no comfort in there, nothing. Such small rooms, just 100 to 130 square feet.
The occupants were safe from air raids at least, but conditions were harsh, and they could not escape the fact that above them, the war was being lost. Hitler's world shrunk to a warren of chambers, a concrete tomb. Above him, Allied bombs and shells destroyed Berlin, killing any possibility that his fantasy city of Germania would ever be realized. The Hitler-Speer partnership that had begun 11 years earlier with such ambitious plans had ended in absolute defeat. Although it's since been modernized, the Olympic Stadium in Berlin is the only one of Hitler's buildings that was completed and survived intact. The Zeppelin Tribune was all but destroyed by Allied bombing and left to rot. The Congress Hall was never completed. Hitler's headquarters, the Reich Chancellery, was bombed and eventually dismantled brick by brick. And the building sites of the German Stadium, the Triumphal Arch, and the Great Hall were all abandoned.
The architectural dreams for Berlin and the ideological dreams of Germania were, of course, a disaster. They resulted in the almost total destruction of many German cities, including Berlin, as well as the absolute downfall of the state.
With the war lost and Germany in ruins, Hitler took his own life on the 30th of April, 1945. His architect, Albert Speer, was arrested, tried, and sentenced to 20 years imprisonment. He died in 1981 in London, a free man. Had their dream been realized, the city of Berlin would have been dominated by the grotesque monuments of the Great Hall and the Triumphal Arch they had built to glorify the Nazi regime. Berlin would have been made the capital of a Nazi-controlled world, and every major city would have been rebuilt in its likeness.